So we have a lot to cover in this one, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. Starting with archetypes, gods, saints, and angels. Today, Jungians use the term archetypes to describe autonomous or semi-autonomous forces that exert influence over us and drive human behavior. But the gods and goddesses from ancient mythology and the angels, saints, and demons of modern Christianity each are said to have a specific realm they hold the keys to, depending on who you talk to within, the denominations. In the same way that the warrior archetype, let's say, owns the realm of aggression, combat, courage in battle, etc., or the sage archetype holds the keys to the realm of wisdom, knowledge, understanding, philosophy, etc. In Greece, a sailor hoping for calm seas would pray to Poseidon, the god of the sea. In Egypt, a scribe searching for inspiration in his writing would pray to Thoth, the god of learning and writing. Before battle on his home turf, a Roman warrior would pray to Minerva, the god of defensive war, as opposed to Mars, the god of violence in general and offensive war, and war as a whole. A modern Orthodox Christian soldier might pray to the Archangel Michael or St. George, not as a deity, by the way, but as an intermediary between the person praying and God. A Catholic who lost her cat might pray a prayer to St. Anthony, patron of lost things, in a similar way. So anyway, what's the point here? Well, first, what's not the point? For one, I'm definitely not saying that saints, angels, gods, and archetypes are all the same thing. But I am saying that there are similarities, and there's a good reason for that. This is something I'm planning on covering in more depth in another video and possibly a series, and it's far from easy to understand or explain, obviously. Jung even basically said, I don't know, but at very least, God and Christ represent the archetype of the self. He struggled persistently with the idea of God, and that's the best he came up with, which makes sense. Ultimately, he decided that yes, God exists, at very least as an aspect of center and totality, as a personification of the collective unconscious, like Christ, the self. On this, he said, "It is only through the psyche that we can establish that God acts upon us. But we are unable to distinguish whether these actions emanate from God or from the unconscious. We cannot tell whether God and the unconscious are two different entities. Both are borderline concepts for transcendental contents. Both empirically, it can be established with a sufficient degree of probability that there is in the unconscious an archetype of wholeness, namely the archetype of the self." So yeah, just a quick side note, and here's the last thing. Many studies clearly show that the habit of praying to God is a very healthy thing, but that's not exactly what this video is about either. Although there's always going to be some kind of overlap for some in this process, and that's certainly okay. So back to what we were talking about. What we're getting at here is communicating with yourself and specific parts of yourself, of your unconscious mind, like David does in Psalms, and Narcissus does in Ovid's Metamorphosis. More on that in a moment. From a psychological standpoint, we know there are powerful and at least partially autonomous forces within our psyches and outside the individual psyche as well in the collective unconscious. Now, the archetypes we're focusing on today are those within you, but it's good to understand that the world of the psyche within you mirrors, at least to a degree, the world of the abstract outside, and we'll leave it at that for now. As Jordan Peterson, Vervaeke, Pajot, and many like them explain so much better than I do, each archetype has a domain of influence, you could call it, for lack of a better way of putting it. In the process of individuation, singling out a specific archetype is incredibly helpful, which is why Jung associated the first stage of the process with the shadow, the second with the Anima and Animus, and the third with the self. He also has 4 stages as well that align with the process of transformation in alchemy. Those are confession, which aligns with the Negredo stage in alchemy, elucidation, which aligns with the Albedo stage, education, which aligns with the Citronitis stage, transformation, which aligns with the rubedo stage. We'll go into more details on that soon. But first, every archetype is a gatekeeper of a sort, holding the keys to a door that serves as a barrier between realms. The shadow holds the keys to shadow integration, of course, and the soul of the man, the Anima, holds the keys to the feminine virtues of gentleness, empathy, intuition, mercy, creativity, so on and so forth. And of course, Anima integration. Within a woman, the Animus holds the keys to the masculine virtues of assertiveness, aggression, the dogged persistence of the warrior archetype, the hunter, so on and so forth. When you seek those sorts of things within, you're ultimately going to consult with what Jung called the soul, your anima, again, if you're a man, or your animus, if you're a woman. But how exactly do you do that? That's the million-dollar question. Communicating with the archetypes within is where it gets a little bit tricky, or can. Because talking to yourself makes you a crazy person, right? No, it really doesn't. Here's Jordan Peterson on this type of self-talk, seeking inspiration from within.
There he built an altar unto the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Now, we don't understand these rituals precisely. You know, I don't know if the people who did this engaged in a meditative ritual. Was that the idea, that you take something of value, you do this, you undertake this dramatic transformation, a life and death transformation? And is that an aid to meditation? And what do? Do you sit down and think? Do you pray? Pray being to ask, to what do I do next? How do I orient myself in the world? It's a useful exercise to do that. I think it's something that people could do every morning. I think it's useful to sit down and think, okay, what's the most important thing I should do today? I have an array of things that call to me to be done, some of which I will do with joy and some of which I will bear as responsibilities, but they array themselves in front of me. And what should I attend to first? Well, do you ask or do you decide? And it seems to me, when I do it, because I do it all the time, I do it every morning, I try to sit down and think, okay, I've got things that I would like to do and things that call to me out of necessity. What do I do first? And it's not so much a decision as it is a question. And I don't know what I'm calling on. I'm calling on my capacity to think, I suppose, but that's not my capacity exactly. I can commune with whatever provides answers, and I can think that that's me thinking, and it isn't that I believe that I can't think. I do believe that I can consciously think, but that's not the same as calling for inspiration. It's not the same process. Just like a dream is not conscious thinking, it's something that happens to you, and that kind of inspiration is also something that happens to you, because I ask myself, well, what's the most important thing I could do next? And then I have an answer to that, but it isn't because I decided exactly. I've decided that I'll do it, whatever it is, and that I want to know what it is. Those are the decisions. But there's an involuntary aspect to the sorting that occurs. And that's the psychological equivalent, I suppose, to this.
And here's what Carl Jung says on the subject. We can never enter the collective unconscious, but we can send the anima, or animus, to bring us information. So we should talk to our animus, or anima. To do this requires a certain dissociation, allowing the side associations to come up, and from those you can conclude the character of the ruler of these side associations. In difficult situations, you talk to yourself, intuitively knowing that you are yourself, and also that other. So you listen to the inner mentor, you develop the inner ear, or you write automatically, and a word is formed by your hand, or your mouth speaks that which you have not thought. Here's one more clip from Jordan Peterson on how the self guides the ego, and then we'll jump into some practical application examples.
So the Jungian self is the thing that guides the ego through transformations. So imagine the ego, which is what you think you are. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about the ego is that the ego can be wrong, and the ego can die and be reborn. So what that indicates is that there's something underneath the ego that can guide that process of transformation. And partly what you're calling on when you call on this higher power is, at least from a psychological perspective, it's a decision to rely on that thing that can guide you through transformations.
Yes, because surely, as we said, in relation to another, we are likely relating to a set of coordinates that we impose on, inverted commas, the female. The true same would be true of the self, that we have created an impression, an egoic impression. We have constructed an artificial self, but beneath it there is a higher self or an ulterior self that can
it's often composed of things that you refused to or weren't willing to develop. And so when Jung talks about, for example, the incorporation of the shadow, is that you've constructed an ego and there's things it can do and can't do, that it's allowed to do and it isn't allowed to do. And then there's a shadow domain that would consist of those things that you could do but haven't. And some of that's terrible, but some of it's what you need to break free.
Here's a few quick examples from elite athletes who understand the value of self-talk.
You got this. It'll be perfect. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
You got babies, you got kids, man. They gotta eat.
Yeah, in day-to-day life, we don't engage in that out loud self-talk. We engage in that private inner dialogue, and it's happening all the time. It's just that in the NFL, those guys are in the public eye, and that inner world they put on display for everyone.
Made for this, man. Thank you, Lord.
They're looking for any edge. And that is a way to improve confidence, is positive self-talk.
Time for the takeover. Time for the takeover.
Psychology is kind of that new wave that can give athletes that advantage that they'd never considered before.
Set this crowd out tonight, E. Set it out, baby.
I always tell myself when I'm warming up during pregame, I tell myself, give them a performance today, E.
Set it out, baby. Show me the best.
Not only thinking it, but, speaking out loud, talking out loud to yourself.
Who do you want to be?
Confidence and mental toughness and focus.
You want to be good or you want to be great?
Are all psychological skills that you can turn from a weakness into a strength.
How do you want to be remembered? Because this is when they remember. Passion, drive, determination.
Unlike him. He's at 72.5 for center. Look there it is. 50. Timeout. Wizards. 5-0 for the King. Oh, LeBron. Entertain the masses.
Push. Curry with the fake on Jaylen Brown. Drills it. That's for you, young fella. Back after this.
That's something that gets me going, talking to myself, getting myself mentally prepared for the task at hand.
We're talking about top 5? No. Number 1. That's where I want to be. So go out and prove it. And show the world what you got, what you can do.
One of the main reasons why I talk to myself is that I hear a voice.
Make them adjust to my game.
Telling me something to focus on.
Smart, focus, footwork, all must be on point. I know I'm the greatest. I know I'm gonna be the greatest. Can't think about it too much. Play football, do what you do. Every single play. Every single play.
Can't guard me, you hear him.
So this trash talk, by the way, is a form of verbal persuasion that's both affirming and motivating to the trash talker, and disruptive to the opponents. Love it or hate it, it's psychological warfare, and done effectively, it works. But the type of self-talk we're about to dig into is even more difficult than the types we just watched, because it involves speaking with a specific part of your psyche and hearing the answer. It comes naturally for some people, and it's difficult for most.